Good evening, dear viewers. Welcome to this Current Affairs talk show this evening with me, Shivani Thapa Bosnev. Less than a fortnight ago, the government came up or made public a plan that to bring back a significant number of youths to Nepal within a time span of a decade. Many, including the experts, dubbed it as an ambitious plan of the government. Indeed, to have an aspiration, a plan is one thing, and to be supported by the reality quotients is another. Today, on International Labour Day or May Day, to discuss on the periphery of this very issue, being specific on the labour situation in Nepal and around the globe, we have with us in our studios Mr. Richard Howard, the country director of the International Labour Organization, Nepal. Welcome to the show, Mr. Howard.
Thank you very much.
I'm
happy to be here.
Right.
I'm good. It's
right.
good.
I'm sure it's been a very busy day for you today.
It's been busy. It's been wet, but it's been productive.
And what do you say? Celebrations like these, a Labor Day or May Day, is just not limited to a ritual, is it?
Yeah, I mean, May Day is a ritual, you know, and I think rituals are important because they bring people together, and they create a sense of solidarity about a shared sense of purpose. And that's what May Day is about. It's bringing workers together and reminding them that they have many things to fight for to promote decent work, better working conditions, more fair wages, and social security. So I see here it is a ritual. You know, people come together. There's a lot of energy, a lot of yelling about what things that need to change. But there's also a very focused sense of direction here in the labor movement, which is very productive, I think.
Mm-hmm. How did you see the celebrations in Nepal? I think this is your first.
This is my first one. Yeah. So we started at 7:30 in the morning, and everyone's, you know, hundreds of people there assembled, and then the rains came, and people looked around. They weren't quite sure what to do, but in the end, they just kept walking, which is really a symbolic of the labor movement, because labor struggle is never easy, and it always entails going against those who hold the resources in society, those who have the power. But there's power in numbers too, and those people and the people in the rallies today kept on walking, and they finished the rally. So I think it was a good sign for the future.
Indeed, it's been pretty symbolic, the rain today.
But it was cold.
But in Nepal, it's considered very auspicious.
Right, and now you see we have very clean air in Kathmandu, so it was a good outcome.
So getting into the agenda, Mr. Howard, how significant do you see in developing countries like Nepal the celebrations like this?
I think it's important just to maintain that momentum in the movement, because there are many challenges that workers face here. And one of the biggest challenges we face, and I think the workers' movement is very aware of it, is just lack of jobs. And not only lack of jobs, but lack of decent jobs. In Nepal, like you mentioned earlier, it faces this challenge of many of the most talented and energetic young people are leaving the country. About 1,400 people leave the country every day. It's phenomenal. And they're often the best and the brightest and the hardest working, because they leave because they feel there's nothing here for them. And I think that's sad, you know, for a country like Nepal with so much to offer, that we're losing these people. And I think the government is very serious, and the workers' movement is serious about working with government and businesses to help create jobs. So I think that's an underlying challenge that everyone's aware of now.
We shall continue to discuss on this regard later in the conversation, Mr. Howard. But let's talk about the interest of the workers in the globalized economy. How do you think the new technology is going to affect the future of work?
I think the new technologies are going to have a very profound change on the workplaces all over the world. And one thing is for sure is that technology, as it has done in the past, will replace certain kinds of jobs. Some people will lose their jobs, and some people will find new jobs, often higher skill jobs that pay better. So the disruption is undeniable. But how severe that disruption will be, how many people will lose their jobs, we don't really yet know. But one thing's for certain, there will be a change. So governments like Nepal and other countries have to start anticipating what kind of changes are on the horizon. and what skill sets are needed for the new economy, and then how do we train people in those new skills so that they can get those jobs. So that will be a challenge. I don't think that technology is the end of work. It's just a changing work environment.
Could you share with us any best practices from some countries, how the governments have addressed this particular issue?
Well, even in my own country, I'm from the United States, and I'm from South Carolina, which used to be the textile center of the United States. So most of the things, clothing and sheets and towels, all kinds of materials were made in the South. And then when I was 10 years old, the whole industry collapsed. So I grew up in an environment where for many years people didn't have jobs, but the government stepped in and began to create the skills for the new economy, which was more high-end manufacturing, but they also created an investment climate where investors wanted to put money in that part of the country. So they had managed to pull in a lot of foreign investment and domestic investment that brought new jobs. So there's a dual task there of creating an environment where businesses can flourish in that new economy, but also where we have the workforce that has the right skills to meet that need. So there's a lot that needs to be done by government, actually, so that private sector can thrive.
Looking into this unionism, Mr. Howard, there's always been a friction there between the workers' interest and the providers' interest. But having seen a lot of this friction in the recent past in Nepal, many say too much trade unionism is sometimes reported as a challenge of industrial and economic growth. We've seen that. What do you say?
I don't think it's a matter of too much trade unionism. It's the right kind of trade unionism. That and here's where it's very important, and this is the responsibility of ILO and the government, is to make sure that we have the right balance between two somewhat competing goals. And one of those goals is productive growth. So we have an environment where we can create jobs, where businesses can make money, because if they don't make money, they won't create new jobs. So businesses have to be profitable. But we also need an environment where workers have fair wages and social security and a degree of job security. So we need to get that balance right. If one side pushes ahead without the other, then we lose that balance. And you can often slip into an environment where labor relations break down, where you have lots of strikes and things don't work. And in an unfair way, people blame the trade unions for that, but it's really not the trade unions' fault. It's the fault of all three parties in the structure: the Ministry of Labor, the business community, and the workers themselves. They have to come together and see the common goal, which is growth, but growth that is fair. Fair for workers, fair for business.
What has your observation in this regard been regarding Nepal?
I think Nepal's come a long way in terms of industrial relations. If we look back 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago, there were many cases where I think the balance was not there. And some sectors suffered from that. Some businesses suffered. But I think we've gotten past that. And we see that while there have been a large number of strikes over the last 10 years, about 95% were not labor strikes, but they were political strikes, whereas labor strikes have drastically reduced. So I think we've gotten to a point where workers realize that they really have to have this productive dialogue. And the best evidence of that is the new labor law, where workers and employers have really come together and developed a very solid law that shows, an understanding of that balance again between workers and businesses.
Right. Could you share the state of progress of the new labor law that is in the process?
So the labor law has been passed by the parliamentary subcommittee and is now in general discussion, which is a very good sign that it will be passed soon, which is huge because this took 10 years to develop. And it's a kind of agreement between workers and employers that you would not find in many countries, really. So this is a spectacular product of negotiation, where, if I just tell you a little bit more about this law, one of the main points that was negotiated in the law was to create what we call an environment for flexible employment. So in the law, it allows companies to hire and fire based on market conditions without significant cost to those employers. But in return, workers should get Social Security, things like unemployment insurance, health insurance, pensions, so a number of times of what we call Social Security that protect them in those downtimes when they may lose their job. So that's an agreement that a labor law would be passed in parallel with the Social Security law. The Social Security law is also in Parliament, so we're very optimistic about that as well. So it's a very sophisticated agreement between workers and employers that sets that long-term goal on growth, I think.
Are there any other major changes in the dossier besides the one you mentioned?
Besides that, another major change is that the labor law, the new labor law, the draft, applies to everyone. So in the past, labor protection was only in those businesses that were more than 10 people. But now we're saying labor law covers everybody. So if you're working in a household as a domestic worker, you have rights under labor law. If you're working in a small home-based industry, weaving parts that are feeding into some other manufacturing process outside your home, you also have protection. So the law covers the most vulnerable, and I think that's brilliant, really. And especially in this age of the Sustainable Development Goals, this global agreement on development is really that we should always focus on those most marginal, the poorest of the poor. And this law does that, so it's a good thing.
And you said that it's been 10 years that you've
10 years, so it was worth the process. You know, these things always take a long time. Many countries take time. But I think this is a very elegant product of negotiation between the workers and the employers.
Let's talk about the ILO conventions now. There is this side as well, that Nepal has been a signatory of the ILO conventions. And what has been your observation on the status of its implementation in Nepal?
So ILO has a large number of conventions, but 8 of those conventions are considered fundamental. And what that means is that every country that's a member state of the ILO is expected to ratify those conventions and implement them. So there are 8 of them. Nepal has ratified 7, which is not bad. They have 1 more to go, and that one's freedom of association. But I think even with that, Nepal is very much committed to freedom of association, the right to gather and organize and negotiate for their rights. So Nepal recognizes that right in the Constitution, so they're getting there on that anyway. So the ratifications are there of the fundamentals mostly, and they've also ratified some other conventions. Now the challenge, of course, is that we can ratify conventions, we can pass laws, but are we really changing the lives of workers on the ground? So a huge amount of work still needs to be done in implementation. Having said that, progress has been made. We have the draft labor law. We have laws on forced labor, trafficking, child labor, on discrimination. So, you know, we're getting there in terms of the legal framework. But we really have to put the pedal to the metal and really make sure that everyone has rights. Those rights are protected. So just to give an example, gender equality. Nepal ratified our Convention on Discrimination. But the question is, are they free of discrimination in the workplace? Clearly not, you know, in terms of wages, in terms of opportunity, the opportunity to get jobs and then to advance in countries. Still a lot needs to be done here. So ILO has its work cut out on implementation, supporting implementation. So said that, what would be your priorities if you prepare, or as you prepare to develop your decent work country program for the next 5 years? So ILO has a country program, a 5-year program, where we say to our 3 core partners, we commit to doing this. These are our priorities. So my priorities as a director is really to figure out and make sure I understand very well the priorities of the country and of the Ministry of Labor and Employment, the priorities of the business community, the priorities of workers, and how I set those within our program. Because ILO is our job here is to serve the interest of those core constituents. So what are we hearing that are priorities coming up? Clearly the job agenda is really important. So what ILO can do to further strengthen industrial relations, to further develop the skill set of upcoming workers to make sure that those skills that they're getting are really what the market needs. That's a priority. The priority is also to implement the labor law and the Social Security law when they're passed, but in the context of the new state system. So we need to figure out how we can support the Minister of Labor to provide more tailored local services on the ground to implement those core labor laws. So those are things that we're discussing now. Of course, migration, safe migration, is critically important. It will not go away. We have to make sure that workers, when they go abroad, they're not taken advantage of at any stage. We see a lot of exploitation of the poorest segment of the migrant workers. This has to end. We have to fight very hard to end this, but also to make sure that they're getting appropriate treatment in the countries where they go and work. So some of the priorities.
Certainly, I would come to the migrant workers issue,
Okay,
because
I'm jumping ahead.
we cannot do without talking about the welfare issues if we exclude the migrant workers therein. Coming to the formal and the informal sector of the workforce in Nepal, the statistics say 90% of them are in the informal sector. So how can the ILO country office here help Nepal to formalize these workers into the informal economy?
So formal, most people probably don't even know what formal sector, informal sector is, but formal sector are really those larger enterprises that are registered with the government. They often pay taxes, and they're directly responsible for implementing labor law and complying with the laws of the country. Whereas informal sector tends to be very small scale, home businesses, small businesses where people sort of operate outside the system. That may have some benefits, but they also don't contribute to national economic development, nor are they responsible to make sure they take care of their employees in respect to labor law. So ILO's approach, you can see with the labor law, the best way to address informality is to make sure the law covers everyone. But we also need to look from the business angle. And are we providing an environment where small businesses see the benefit of registering their companies, for example, accessing training programs and credit that they so desperately need? They need to see some advantage to joining the formal economy. So we have to work on it from that angle. But workers also in the informal economy, even a domestic worker, they need to understand their rights under the law and also organize with the trade union movement so that they can advocate their rights. So it's a process that entails government doing its part, workers doing their part, and businesses doing their part. It's not easy, and it's not going to happen overnight.
All right, and given the brain drain, Mr. Howard, in Nepal, the reports, as you can see, that Nepal, on one side there is this high percent of brain drain, and then on the other side we do not have workers even to pursue with or help out with the reconstruction work.
Exactly. This is one of the most mind-boggling things for me in Nepal, is that if you go to businesses, and it doesn't matter what sector they're in, but you mentioned construction, and they all say, we are short of skilled workers. We cannot find the workers we need. And part of the problem is that workers are going overseas, and I think the message about opportunities at home is not clearly relayed to them. But there's also a part where workers don't necessarily have the skills that are required by the market. So we see a lot of training going on in the educational system and vocational training institutes, but it's not necessarily the training that's needed by businesses. So we need to fix that mismatch. That's one key step. But I also think that when we get the wage setting mechanisms right in a country, and we have more productive dialogue between workers and employers, both at the factory level, but also at the national level, that we can see an increase in wages that the market probably could handle. Because ultimately we need to pay better here to keep those workers home.
Right. You already stated, and from that we can make out that ILO in Nepal is very closely looking into, the status and the woes of the Nepali migrant workers. So what actually has Nepal's ILO been doing to protect the rights of these Nepali migrant workers?
A lot, and it's not just ILO. I should say there are a number of other programs that are with international support that are also doing very good work. ILO work recently has focused on the legal framework, revising the Foreign Employment Act, which is still underway, but we expect a new law in the next year or so to provide better protection to migrant workers. But also another area that we work on is bilateral agreements. And we've seen globally, particularly in Asia, that bilateral agreements are very effective in terms of negotiating better conditions for workers. So bilateral agreements are important. But our recent work has focused very, very heavily on recruitment processes. And if you tracked a migrant worker from the village, say you tracked a young woman that wanted to work in domestic employment in Saudi Arabia, the number of middlemen in the process, taking little bits of money each step of the way, would be huge. And by the end of the day, that migrant worker may have paid a very large sum to get to where she wanted to go, which would result in a year or two salary taken away from her to pay that debt for something she should not pay anything for according to national law. And national law is a free ticket, free visa policy by the government. These workers shouldn't be paying. And if they have to pay, they shouldn't be paying like that. So we need a much better and more fair system of recruitment that cuts out all of this exploitation along the line. That's really important. Mm-hmm. But also, we have to have expectations of those countries that receive migrant workers to treat them fairly. So ILO's responsibility is to work with those governments in countries like in the GCC countries in general to make sure that they provide a better, more fair deal to workers. Because ultimately workers, whether they're migrants or domestic or national workers, they all have the right to safe and healthy workplaces, fair wages, days off, all those rights that are covered under international labor standards.
Mm-hmm. And I understand ILO has been in Nepal for 5 decades now. Mm. So if you could list down some of your key achievements in this period.
I've only been here 8 months, but I think there have been a lot of achievements in Nepal. I think, if we look at the capacity of the workers, the trade union movement here, it's really far above the average that you would see in other countries in Asia. Even countries which are more developed economically, you don't have the quality, the sophisticated trade union network. So that's a huge source of pride. If you look at the employers organization, again, very capable support. The FNCCI is our main partner in this country and really extraordinarily capable organization. If we look at labor, the labor system, the Ministry of Labor, I think at the national level, they've developed some capacity. If you look at how they've managed the rollout of national laws, very, very positive. This new labor law process, for example. A lot of strengths there that we can take credit for. Mm-hmm. But still lots of work that needs to be done.
Right, right. And with the UN Sustainable Development Goals all rolled out, what is the role of ILO in the context of Nepal and across the globe?
So Sustainable Development Goals, we have 17 goals agreed upon by the entire world. It's an incredible process. But Goal 8 really relates directly to ILO work. It says that growth should be inclusive and it should provide opportunities for decent work. That's what ILO does. Decent work really is to make sure that workers have the right to negotiate for safe working conditions, that they can organize, and that they also have access to Social Security and safety and health, these issues that we're talking about here today. So very specifically stated. The thing about the SDGs, the goals, is that they're all related. So if ILO helps with Goal 8, we're also helping with Goal 1 on reducing poverty, the goal on inequality, the goal on health, the goal on gender equality. It's a package where we all have to look at the interrelationship between different goals here and make sure we do our part. I think Nepal will get there.
All right, that sounds good. The good news coming over. And before we wrap up, Mr. Howard, anything you'd like to stress on or a message that you would want to send out on International Workers' Day today?
I think the main message, the underlying theme, is that labor is not a commodity. It's the underlying principle of the ILO's purpose. It's a really simple point. We're not to be bought and sold. Our labor is part of our humanity. We bring it to the table. We have the right to be treated as people, not as producers, and people with needs, people with families, people with health challenges, people who grow old and need pensions. That's really the core. That's what ILO is about, is maintaining that dignity in work.
Thank you. Thank you so much. On this note, would want to wrap up today's conversation. Thank you so much for coming over and sharing your views to Nepal Television's viewer. And dear viewers, that's it coming to you from today's Current Affairs show. Yes, challenges there are many, but at par lie the opportunities. That is a statement or a note that would want to end on today's International Labourers Day. Thank you for being with us. We'll catch you soon with another issue next day. Goodbye and namaste.